Let's go live to Tel Aviv now, where we can speak to journalist Jotam Confino. Jotam, thank you for joining us. Our Prime Minister standing shoulder to shoulder with your Prime Minister today. Was that meaningful to you as you watched it? Did it signify?
I would say, I'm not going to speak for myself because I'm trying to be, impartial when I'm covering this, but I can speak for Israelis, as in, I've spoken to many Israelis who all said the same thing. The fact that world leaders keep visiting Israel in this very, very chaotic time of war, it means a lot. It's, first of all, it makes them feel like they're not alone, but also when it's the world's most powerful leaders, such as Rishi Sunak or the President Biden or the German Chancellor, it's a strong signal. And this is what Israel needs right now, not only because of Hamas and the war that it's fighting with Hamas, but actually, more importantly, to scare off anyone who might think of taking advantage of this. So the fact that Rishi Sunak and President Biden have been here back to back and send signals to, for example, Iran, Hezbollah, that they should not take advantage of the situation, I think that's probably what means the most to Israel, because Israel believes it can defeat Hamas. But if it can fight both Hezbollah and Hamas at the same time on two different fronts, that's a whole different scenario. So yes, a lot of symbolism here, but very meaningful for most Israelis that these world leaders come this time.
Talk to me, Jotam, about what our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said to yours, which is, we want you to win. I think some people will think that was pretty much infantile, reductive, childish, a most peculiar thing to say, making it sound like a game of cards or a game of chess rather than an out-and-out war which has the motive to obliterate a terrorist organization. I mean, it really does seem, I think, to some, inane, that comment. To others, I'm sure it will seem incredibly supportive and, exactly what was needed and wanted. I wonder what your response is and what the response of the people that you've been talking to today is.
Well, this is the kind of language we hear from politicians. I think most people are used to it. I would say probably Israelis in general would like to hear those kinds of words coming from a man like Rishi Sunak, even if it is a bit infantile, like you said. For them, it's absolutely crucial that the world leaders stand behind Israel, because it is currently experiencing not only backlash because of what's happening in Gaza, it's experiencing, Jews around the world are experiencing hatred, a rise in anti-Semitism because of Israel's attempt to defend itself against Hamas, to eradicate Hamas. So this language, even though it might be infantile and it might be a bit, I'm not sure if appropriate or inappropriate is the right word, but it's, as you said, what does that even mean? This is not a game. This is a war. But I think that most Israelis, the ones that I speak to, they appreciate it, because after all, this is about winning against Hamas. And you cannot, and I've said this before, you cannot eradicate an ideology, but you can eradicate Hamas physically from the Gaza Strip. And this is what it's all about. So in that sense, yes, winning is on the table, if you can say that.
And as far as you're concerned, the possibility or the probability even of eradicating Hamas, of wiping it off the face of the area, with civilians obviously living there. Some of them have moved and been displaced, but not all of them. They couldn't possibly all move away. And also, of course, the hostages who've been taken from Israel. Some of them are British. We think up to 10 of them might be British, some of them different nationalities. Everything complicates everything. And the underground tunnel system, as we know, liberally peppered with booby traps that are absolutely lethal, makes everything so difficult. So what do you envisage that the path to winning would be? How will they do it?
It's a very good question. First of all, we have heard repeatedly from the army, from the prime minister, from the defense minister, that this will take time. You cannot eradicate Hamas in 2 weeks. We're already 2 weeks into this war, and Israel hasn't even launched its ground invasion. So it will take a long time, and it will have to be dismantled little by little. First of all, Israel is planning on systematically killing all Hamas members. And then, of course, dismantling its infrastructure, destroying the tunnels. But like you said, there are over 200 hostages kept by Hamas now. The minute Israel launches a ground invasion, the chances of them coming out of their lives significantly decreases. That's just a fact. Obviously, you have elite soldiers who know how to handle rescue situations, but this is not a normal situation. This is not a normal hostage situation. It's Hamas having babies and old people underground, hiding behind civilians. It's almost impossible. So Israel is facing an almost impossible task, but it has declared it a goal, and it will not agree to a ceasefire, even though we hear many world leaders calling for a ceasefire, such as Egypt's President al-Sisi, Jordan's King Abdullah. In fact, they issued a joint statement, but Israel will not do that. It's very, very simple. It will have to remove Hamas and then figure out what to do. And that's the big question. What do you do next?
And what do you think the answer is to that question? I know it's one of the unanswerable questions, but you know, as a government, as a strategy, as an army, there has to be some kind of idea about A, what the goal is, but B, what's meant to happen next, doesn't there?
Well, yeah, it's quite interesting. I was at a press conference today with the economy minister. Sorry, I'm a bit tired.
Don't worry.
I'm working all day.
Don't worry, it's fine.
And Neil Barkat, and we asked him this question, and he said, well, we're not thinking about it right now. How can you not think about it? It's basically doing what the United States did in Afghanistan and Iraq, not having a plan for the day after. It is a classic mistake not to have any plan what to do after. But nevertheless, Israel is not focusing on that right now. But I have two options that I think are the most realistic. Either Israel will occupy Gaza again and administer the entire area like they do in the West Bank, or it will try and install the Palestinian Authority, which is quite unlikely because the Palestinian Authority will not like to be seen as collaborating with Hamas in this particular war. So the only option really, as I see it, is occupying Gaza until you find out what to do. So it will be an interim period of Israel occupying Gaza. That's at least my analysis of this.
And let me ask you about those lorries full of aid which are still at the Rafah crossing and have not yet gone in to Gaza. We know that they've got food, they've got water, they've got medicine, that's all they've got. We understand the explanation for why much needed fuel is not being taken in. That makes some type of sense. But why haven't they gone into the area yet? Why are they still outside? What do you understand is going on? Is it Egyptian reluctance? Is it Israel saying nothing goes in until our hostages come out? Or what's going on?
There's a big misconception in the world about the humanitarian aid. Most people blame Israel, and that's true partially because Israel is imposing a massive siege on most of the Gaza Strip. But Egypt could have allowed aid to go in. But first of all, Egypt wanted reassurance from Israel that the entire area near this border crossing will not be bombarded in any way. And that's understandable. They don't want to send their people in trucks and then risk them being blown up. It makes sense. But the second thing is that Egypt is not interested in opening the border crossing and allowing thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of Palestinians crossing and fleeing into Sinai. Egypt has said that repeatedly. So it's both Egypt and Israel, both for the past more than a week, actually, fighting about what this opening, how it should be. And finally, the mediator, the United States, came in, put pressure on both. And now we're seeing these limited amounts of trucks supposedly coming in starting from tomorrow. But like the UN said, it's nowhere near enough. And one last thing is that Israel, up until now, has said humanitarian aid going into Gaza means humanitarian aid going into Hamas. Hamas will benefit from this. And this is an unacceptable scenario for Israel to have Hamas benefiting, taking food, medicine, when you're trying to kill them. It is literally the opposite that Israel wants. But nevertheless, they've said now that the aid can go in as long as it doesn't fall into the hands of Hamas, which seems like an impossible thing to try and prevent.
All right, let me ask you one more question. I know you're exhausted. I'm sorry. I hope then you'll be able to go home and get some sleep. We are used in this country to seeing the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then Ukrainians exiting in very large numbers into Poland primarily. That's what we saw. We saw trains leaving, we saw them getting out at the other end, we saw the borders pretty much open, and we saw a big flow, a big flood of Ukrainians taking refuge and being welcomed into Poland. I think lots of people are absolutely nonplussed and confused at the idea that Egypt, which, as you've just said, is right next to the Sinai Desert, where there's plenty of space and everything else, doesn't embrace or welcome its brethren and say, listen, you're fleeing this onslaught. Come in, we'll look after you, maybe even only for a short time, but we're brothers and we care for you, and we have space, lots and lots of it. Come in. Why doesn't Egypt embrace the fleeing Gazan Palestinians? What is happening there?
It's a very good question. It's a question that not many people ask, so I'm happy that you're asking it. We have to zoom out a bit. We have to understand that even though Egypt has a peace treaty with Israel, at the end of the day, Egypt is an Arab country. It belongs to the Muslim world, and it cannot be seen as collaborating with Israel, basically displacing Palestinians, actively taking part of a huge displacement of Palestinians and allowing Israel to go in and take over Gaza. For Egypt, that's an unacceptable scenario, because they will be criticized from east to west, from all across the Middle East. All Middle East nations would be furious if Egypt took part in such a displacement. That's one thing. And secondly, they don't want to have responsibility for 2 million people in the Sinai Desert, even though they have the space for it, and they would probably also get help. They still don't want to have that responsibility. And we also see it's not just Egypt that thinks like that. In Europe, yes, in Ukraine, of course, people have been very helpful. But in general, when we're talking about people from the Middle East, it's not exactly like Europe. It's very happy with having so many people coming all at once. So it's different reasons, but mainly Egypt is trying not to look like it's collaborating with Israel, displacing Palestinians from Gaza, which is their home.